All right, so let's start this broadcast with some major developments that are coming in from Moscow, where Russia's President Vladimir Putin has made a number of statements on a potential ceasefire. Now, the remarks were made during a question and answer session at a joint press conference with Belarus's President Lukashenko. Now, Putin said that a ceasefire with Ukraine is important, but many questions about the proposed deal still remain unanswered. Now, following up on his skepticism, the Russian president indicated that a phone call with his American counterpart Donald Trump is in the pipeline.
The idea itself is correct, and we certainly support it. But there are issues that we need to discuss, and I think that we need to talk to our American partners, maybe to President Trump, to call and discuss it with him.
Now, Putin, in fact, went on to question the need for a 30-day ceasefire. He said that it gives time to Ukraine to potentially mobilize and then to rearm during the month-long truce. The Russian leader also raised many more questions, like who will control the ceasefire, given the 2,000-kilometer-long war front with Ukraine.
We agree with the proposals to stop the hostilities, but we proceed from the fact that this ceasefire should be such that it would lead to long-term peace and eliminate the original roots of this crisis.
Now, Putin's comments during a press conference have come just hours ahead of a potential meeting with the U.S. envoy Steve Witkoff, who will be arriving in Moscow. Now, earlier, Russia had rejected the temporary ceasefire proposal, saying that the deal offers nothing to the country. Moscow called for a long-term settlement and solution. So this, of course, is the latest that has come in from the Russian President Vladimir Putin, where he has questioned the necessity and even the effectiveness of what a 30-day ceasefire could in fact lead to, and to give us more insights in terms of how comments such as these would be perceived in Washington and what would be the reaction from there. We are joined by our correspondent Susan Tehrani, who's joining us live on this broadcast. Susan, a little while back in a joint press briefing along with the Belarusian President, Vladimir Putin in fact raised a number of different questions about this proposal by the Americans for a 30-day period of ceasefire, where the Russian president said that this is a 30-day period that could be used by the Ukrainians to rearm and regroup, and it does not serve the interests of the Russian people at all, and the Russian side at all. At this moment, it's a comment that's just been made, but how, in your assessment, do you think this would be perceived by Donald Trump?
Well, two things. First of all, this seems to be in response to President Trump's threats against Vladimir Putin yesterday. He also talked to the press while making those threats afterwards in a gaggle and said that he'd be open to having a telephone conversation with Vladimir Putin. It appears that in not so many words, Putin is acknowledging that as well. And it's very likely, considering the fact that, as you mentioned, Steve Witkoff, the U.S. envoy, is in Russia at this point. Another point is Putin wanted to make these comments because right now President Trump is meeting with NATO Secretary General Mark Rutte. Of course, on the agenda is the war in Ukraine, how to proceed. It also comes at a time when President Trump is pushing Europe to take responsibility for its own security. The future of NATO is on the agenda, of course, as well, and how much the United States wants to commit to Ukraine and Europe and NATO as well, by extension. So, the comments by Putin are happening in the backdrop of all of these events. But I think the main question is going to be whether or not Vladimir Putin is going to tone down some of his requests that, a ceasefire should lead to a lasting peace and whatnot, which is the second step after the ceasefire. Or is he going to continue to, have a bullish attitude? Because a lot of analysts believe that, ultimately, if he would have just accepted whatever happened between the United States and Ukraine, that would have sort of not been playing his cards properly in negotiations that are upcoming. So, the devil's in the detail. This is just the beginning. But a lot of it seems to be rhetoric and the war of words. And a lot of it is meant for domestic consumption by the two leaders, Donald Trump and Vladimir Putin as well.
I think that's absolutely interesting that a lot of this could, in fact, be for domestic consumption. We'll, of course, have to see as to how things, of course, unfold as Steve Witkoff is in Moscow currently and could, of course, meet Vladimir Putin as well. Thank you very much indeed, Susan Tehrani, for joining us with all those updates there.
Thank you.
For all the latest news, download the WION app and subscribe to our YouTube channel.